There is a moment in life that few people forget. A moment when you suddenly realize that the room has turned against you. The conversations feel colder, the smiles become thinner. People who once seemed neutral begin to take subtle positions. Someone interrupts you more than usual. Someone dismisses your ideas more easily. Someone quietly questions your motives behind your back. And slowly, almost invisibly, you feel the atmosphere shift. It is no longer simply disagreement. It feels like alignment, as if several individuals, whether consciously or not, have begun moving in the same direction, and that direction is against you. Most people panic in this moment, not visibly at first, but internally. Their thoughts begin racing. Their emotions tighten. They start defending themselves more aggressively, explaining their intentions, arguing their point, trying desperately to prove that they are right and others are wrong. And in doing so, they unknowingly make the most common mistake a person can make when facing opposition from multiple directions at once. They fight emotionally instead of strategically. The truth is uncomfortable, but it must be understood before anything else. When many people appear to be against you, the situation is no longer about arguments or ideas. It becomes about positioning, about perception, about hierarchy. The surface conflict may appear to be about who is correct, but beneath the surface, something far more primal is taking place. Human beings are instinctively aware of status and alignment. When groups begin forming, individuals subconsciously adjust their behavior to protect their own position within the group. This means that when you face a situation where many people seem to oppose you, you are no longer dealing with isolated opinions. You are dealing with a structure of power forming around perception. And that is exactly the kind of situation that thinkers like Machiavelli studied carefully. Because Machiavelli did not examine human behavior through moral ideals or comforting illusions. He examined it through reality, through observation, through the quiet mechanics of influence and survival inside complex social environments. And one of the most important lessons hidden inside that observation is this: when everyone appears to be against you, reacting emotionally is the fastest way to lose. Not because the opposition is necessarily stronger than you, but because emotional reaction strengthens the alignment against you. Think about how group dynamics work for a moment. When someone becomes defensive in front of a group, something strange happens. The group begins observing the defense rather than the original issue. Your emotional reaction becomes the new focus of attention. People start interpreting your behavior instead of examining the facts. And interpretation inside groups rarely favors the individual who appears agitated, defensive, or desperate to be understood. Instead, groups instinctively gravitate toward individuals who appear calm, stable, and composed under pressure. This is why the first principle for winning, when everyone appears to be against you, is not aggression. It is control. Control over your emotional signals, control over your tone, control over your reactions. Because the moment you remain calm while others expect you to become defensive, something subtle happens. The script they unconsciously prepared begins to collapse. Most opposition is built around expectation. People expect resistance. They expect argument. They expect justification. But when those expectations are disrupted, uncertainty appears. And uncertainty is extremely powerful in social environments. When people are uncertain about how to interpret your behavior, they hesitate. They observe. They begin reassessing the situation instead of moving forward with automatic assumptions. This pause is your first advantage. Most people never recognize this advantage because they rush past it. They try to win the argument immediately instead of reshaping the environment around the argument. But Machiavelli understood something deeper about human conflict. When you are surrounded by opposition, the goal is not to defeat every opponent individually. That would be exhausting and inefficient. The real goal is to destabilize the alignment against you. Groups rarely remain unified under pressure unless they feel certain about their position. If uncertainty begins spreading through the group, small cracks appear. Someone begins reconsidering their stance. Someone else becomes less vocal. Another person decides it may be safer to remain neutral rather than openly oppose you. And slowly, the structure that once appeared unified begins weakening. But none of this happens if you behave exactly the way your opponents expect, which is why emotional discipline is the first weapon in this situation. Imagine a scenario where several individuals criticize your decisions publicly. Many people respond by explaining themselves immediately. They list reasons. They defend their intentions. They argue their logic point by point. But notice what this does psychologically. It places you in a defensive position. And once someone is perceived as defending themselves against multiple people, observers instinctively assume those multiple people must be correct. Not because they examined the issue deeply, but because numbers create perception. The individual appears isolated. The group appears confident. And perception quietly becomes reality. Strategic thinkers reverse this dynamic. Instead of defending immediately, they observe the structure of the criticism itself. They look for patterns. Who is speaking first? Who repeats the criticism? Who remains silent but watches closely? Who seems uncertain? These details reveal the hidden hierarchy inside the opposition. Because even when several people appear aligned against you, they are rarely equal in influence. Usually one or two individuals drive the momentum while others simply follow the emotional current of the room. And if you can identify those individuals, you begin understanding the real structure of the situation. This knowledge allows you to shift the focus away from defending yourself and towards something far more effective, questioning the alignment itself. A calm question delivered at the right moment can change the entire atmosphere. Instead of saying, "That's not true," or "You're misunderstanding me," you ask something that forces the group to examine its own assumptions. Can you explain specifically what decision you're referring to? Or perhaps even more calmly, let's clarify something before we continue. Notice what this does psychologically. It moves the conversation away from accusation and toward examination. And examination is dangerous for groups built on emotional momentum rather than evidence. Because the moment details begin entering the conversation, vague alignment starts weakening. People who felt comfortable agreeing with criticism suddenly need to think more carefully about what exactly they are supporting. Some will hesitate. Some will soften their tone. Some will remain silent. And that silence reveals something extremely important. The opposition was never as solid as it appeared. But this is only the first layer of strategy. Winning when everyone seems to be against you also requires understanding why alignment formed in the first place. Because opposition rarely appears randomly. People align against individuals for several predictable reasons. Sometimes it is competition. Sometimes it is insecurity. Sometimes it is misunderstanding. And sometimes it is simply convenience. When groups feel uncertain or threatened, they often choose a single individual to focus their frustration on. This creates a sense of unity inside the group. It gives them a shared direction for their emotions. In other words, opposition can sometimes be less about you and more about the psychological needs of the group itself. Recognizing this removes much of the emotional weight from the situation. Because if the opposition is driven by group psychology rather than objective truth, then defeating it requires understanding group psychology, not louder arguments, not emotional reactions. Strategy. One of the most powerful strategic shifts you can make in these situations is refusing to mirror the hostility directed at you. When multiple people criticize someone, they often expect that person to respond with similar hostility. This creates conflict, which strengthens the emotional energy of the group. But when hostility meets calm clarity instead, the emotional fuel disappears. The group suddenly feels uncertain about how to proceed. Some individuals may even begin feeling uncomfortable with the aggression that previously felt justified. This discomfort creates distance. Distance weakens alignment. And weakening alignment is the beginning of regaining influence. Another critical principle Machiavelli observed is that perception of strength matters more than immediate victory. Many people believe they must win every argument immediately to protect their reputation. But reputation is not built in single moments. It is built through patterns. If you consistently appear composed under pressure, people remember that. If you consistently refuse to become emotionally destabilized, people remember that. And over time, even individuals who once opposed you begin adjusting their behavior because your composure changes how they perceive you. They may not admit it openly, but perception quietly evolves. You are no longer the isolated individual defending themselves. You become the individual who remains stable, while others become emotional. And stability inside conflict environments creates authority. But perhaps the most important shift happens inside your own mind. When everyone appears to be against you, the natural instinct is to shrink psychologically, to question yourself, to assume you must be wrong simply because many people disagree. But numbers do not always represent truth. They often represent comfort. Groups feel comfortable agreeing with each other. Agreement reduces tension. It creates the illusion of certainty. But strategic thinkers are not guided by comfort. They are guided by clarity. Clarity requires examining situations calmly, even when social pressure pushes you toward emotional reaction. And the moment you begin operating from clarity instead of fear of opposition, something changes. You stop trying to defeat the group. Instead, you begin reshaping the environment in which the group operates. And that is where true strategic advantage begins. Once you understand that opposition is rarely as unified as it appears, your next objective becomes something very specific, separating perception from reality. Because when many people seem to stand against you, the greatest weapon they possess is not necessarily strength or logic. It is the illusion of consensus. Human beings instinctively trust consensus. When several individuals express the same criticism, observers unconsciously assume the criticism must contain truth. Even if the observers have not examined the situation themselves, they begin aligning with the majority simply because the majority appears confident. This psychological shortcut exists everywhere. In workplaces, in social circles, in politics, even in everyday conversations. People follow perceived certainty, which means that when everyone appears to oppose you, the real battle is not between you and the group. The real battle is between perception and clarity. Strategic individuals understand that perception can change quickly if the structure supporting it becomes unstable. And instability often begins with small, carefully chosen actions. For example, when criticism becomes public, many people instinctively try to correct every accusation immediately. They attempt to address each comment, each complaint, each misunderstanding one by one. But this approach contains a hidden trap. By responding to every criticism equally, you unintentionally validate the idea that every criticism deserves equal attention, which strengthens the perception that the group's position is legitimate. Strategic thinkers do something very different. They choose carefully what deserves response and what deserves silence. Silence, when used correctly, can be one of the most powerful psychological tools in moments of opposition. Not passive silence, controlled silence. The type of silence that suggests confidence rather than confusion. Because when someone delivers criticism expecting immediate reaction and receives calm silence instead, the dynamic changes. Observers begin asking themselves a different question. Instead of thinking, why is this person defending themselves? They begin wondering, why is this criticism not affecting them? This subtle shift places pressure back onto the critics. They must now justify their aggression more clearly. And the more clearly aggression must be justified, the more likely weaknesses in that aggression become visible. Sometimes those weaknesses appear as exaggerations, sometimes as inconsistencies, sometimes as simple emotional bias. But once these weaknesses become visible, the illusion of unanimous opposition begins weakening, and when that illusion weakens, individuals inside the group start thinking independently again. This is where patience becomes critical. Most people want instant resolution. They want the group to suddenly recognize their mistake and reverse course immediately. But human psychology rarely works that way. Perception shifts gradually. First, someone becomes quieter. Then someone stops repeating the criticism. Then someone begins speaking to you more neutrally. These small changes may appear insignificant, but together they represent something powerful: fragmentation. The alignment against you is breaking apart, but this fragmentation only occurs if you resist the temptation to escalate emotionally, because escalation reunites the group. When people feel attacked collectively, they instinctively defend each other. They become a stronger unit simply because they feel threatened. But when you remain composed while the group expresses hostility, individuals inside the group begin questioning whether their behavior is justified, and questioning dissolves unity. Another strategic move in these situations involves something Machiavelli understood extremely well: selective engagement. You do not need to confront everyone who opposes you. In fact, confronting everyone usually makes the situation worse. Instead, you identify the individuals whose opinions carry the most influence over others. Every group has them. Sometimes they are the loudest voices. Sometimes they are the quiet individuals whose approval others seek subconsciously. But once you identify them, you begin understanding where real influence exists. Then you engage strategically, not publicly, not aggressively, but calmly and directly. When influential individuals feel respected rather than challenged, they often become more open to reconsidering their stance. This does not require manipulation or deception. It simply requires understanding that human beings respond differently when they feel heard rather than confronted. Even small shifts in the perspective of influential individuals can dramatically change group dynamics. Because once those individuals soften their opposition, the rest of the group loses its anchor. And without an anchor, group alignment dissolves quickly. But there is an even deeper psychological layer to this process. When everyone appears to oppose you, it tests something fundamental inside you: your relationship with approval. Many individuals struggle in these situations because they depend on approval to feel secure. When approval disappears, they panic. They attempt to regain it by explaining themselves excessively or by trying to please everyone simultaneously. But this rarely works, because groups respect individuals who maintain internal stability even when external approval fluctuates. The moment you stop chasing approval and start operating from internal clarity, your posture changes. Your voice becomes calmer. Your decisions become more deliberate. Your reactions become less predictable. And this unpredictability makes it difficult for opponents to control the narrative around you. Another mistake people make in these situations is assuming they must prove everyone wrong. But proving everyone wrong is not always necessary. Sometimes the most effective strategy is simply allowing time to reveal the truth. If the criticism against you is built on misunderstanding or emotional momentum, reality will eventually expose its weaknesses. But reality cannot do its work if you constantly disrupt the environment with emotional reactions. Strategic individuals create space for reality to speak for itself. They continue performing their responsibilities calmly. They maintain composure in public interactions. They allow observers to compare behavior rather than arguments. And over time, observers begin noticing something important. The individual everyone criticized appears stable and consistent. The individuals who criticized appear emotional and reactive. This comparison quietly reshapes perception, without dramatic confrontation, without endless arguments, simply through contrast. This is why Machiavelli often emphasized the importance of reputation built through behavior rather than words. Words can be dismissed. Behavior is harder to ignore. When someone consistently behaves with composure while facing opposition, observers begin re-evaluating the situation. They may not apologize openly, but their attitudes shift, and attitude shifts gradually transform the social environment. Eventually, the same individuals who once opposed you begin interacting with you differently. Some become neutral, some become supportive, some pretend the conflict never existed. But the outcome becomes clear. You survived the alignment against you without surrendering your position. Not through aggression, not through emotional retaliation, but through strategic patience and psychological clarity. And that clarity is the real victory. Because once you experience this process, you begin understanding something that most people never fully grasp. Opposition is not always a threat. Sometimes it is simply a test of emotional discipline, a test of strategic thinking, a test of whether you react instinctively or observe intelligently. Most individuals fail this test because they focus on defending themselves instead of understanding the environment around them. But when you learn to observe the deeper mechanics of human behavior, opposition stops feeling overwhelming. You start seeing patterns. You start recognizing predictable reactions. You start understanding how perception forms and dissolves. And suddenly the situation that once felt like everyone was against you becomes something very different. It becomes a landscape, a complex social landscape where influence moves quietly between individuals, where alliances form and dissolve, where perception shifts based on behavior. And once you see that landscape clearly, you realize something powerful. Winning when everyone appears to be against you is rarely about defeating everyone. It is about refusing to lose yourself in the pressure of their alignment. Because the moment you remain calm while others expect you to collapse, the balance of power begins shifting in ways most people never notice until it is too late. If this way of thinking made you look at opposition differently, stay connected with this channel. We explore human behavior, power dynamics, and strategic thinking without illusions, only realism. And before you leave, think about something carefully. Have you ever faced a moment when it felt like everyone turned against you? And looking back now, was the real challenge defeating them? Or mastering your own reaction to them?